I learned to read in a room that smelled like coal dust and desperation. My mother would sit with me after her 12-hour shift binding shoes, her fingers wrapped in bloodstained cloth, teaching me letters by candlelight. We couldn't afford books. We couldn't afford paper. We barely afforded the candle. But she insisted I learn, not because education would make me happy, not because knowledge was beautiful, but because she understood something that most poor people never understand until it's too late. Poverty is a trap that locks from the inside. Dunfermline, Scotland, 1835. My father was a master weaver. Let me tell you what that meant. It meant he had a skill that took years to develop. It meant his hands could create intricate patterns that machines couldn't replicate. It meant he had pride, purpose, a place in the world. And then the power loom arrived. Within 2 years, my father's skill was worthless, not diminished, not reduced, completely worthless. The machine could do in an hour what took him a day, and it never got tired, never asked for wages, never needed to eat. I watched my father try to compete. He worked longer hours, he reduced his prices, he made his patterns more elaborate, thinking quality would save him. It didn't. The market doesn't care about your skill, it cares about your cost. We starved, not slowly, rapidly. Within months we went from comfortable to desperate. My father would sit at his loom, moving his hands through patterns no one wanted, pretending he still had work. My mother took in any work she could find, washing, sewing, scrubbing floors. And I learned the first truth about poverty. It's not about lacking money, it's about lacking options. When you're poor, every choice is made for you. Where you live, what you eat, what work you take, what dreams you're allowed to have. Poverty doesn't just limit your resources, it limits your imagination. You can't dream of building an empire when you're trying to figure out how to eat tomorrow. But my mother refused to let poverty define us. Even when we had nothing, she insisted on one thing. I would learn. I would read. I would understand the world beyond our walls. She didn't know she was teaching me the lesson that would make me the richest man in the world. The lesson every poor man must learn. We emigrated to America when I was 13. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The land of opportunity, they called it. What they didn't mention was that opportunity for a poor immigrant boy meant a textile factory basement, working 13-hour days as a bobbin boy, changing spools of thread for $1.20 a week. The factory was dark. The air was thick with cotton dust that turned your lungs grey. The machines were loud enough to make you deaf. And the work was mind-numbing, the same motion repeated thousands of times a day until your hands moved on their own and your mind went somewhere else just to survive. This is where most poor men stay, not because they are lazy, not because they're stupid, but because poverty is designed to keep you too tired to escape. When you work 13 hours a day, you don't have energy to learn. You don't have time to think. You don't have space to plan. You come home, you eat if there's food, you sleep, and you do it again. Poverty is a treadmill that only moves fast enough to keep you alive. But I made a decision in that basement, a decision that changed everything. I decided I would not let my circumstances define my capacity. Let me be clear about what this means. It doesn't mean positive thinking. It doesn't mean working harder at the job you have. It doesn't mean being grateful for the opportunity to be exploited. It means understanding that where you are is not where you have to stay. I took a job as a telegraph messenger boy. It paid about the same. The hours were just as long. But here's the difference. I wasn't in a basement anymore. I was running through the streets of Pittsburgh, delivering messages to banks, law offices, factories, trading companies. I was seeing how the world worked. Every message I delivered was a window into business. Every office I entered was a classroom. Every conversation I overheard was a lesson in how money moved, how deals were made, how power operated. The poor man's mistake is thinking that work is about wages. It's not. Work is about position. Work is about access. Work is about what you can see and learn and become while you're getting paid. I learned Morse code, not because anyone asked me to, not because it was part of my job, but because I understood that the telegraph operators made more money than messengers. And if I could do their job before they needed someone to do it, I would be ready when opportunity arrived. This is the lesson, the one lesson every poor man must learn. You cannot wait for opportunity. You must become the person opportunity needs before opportunity arrives. At 17, I became a telegraph operator for the Pennsylvania Railroad. And this is when I started to understand the real game. The game that separates the poor from the rich. The game that most people never even know they're playing. The game is this. The rich don't trade time for money. They trade knowledge for leverage. Let me explain. When you're poor, you trade your time directly for money. An hour of work equals an hour of pay. If you want more money, you work more hours. But there's a limit. You only have 24 hours in a day. You need to sleep. You need to eat. So there's a ceiling on how much you can make trading time for money. The rich understood something different. They understood that knowledge can be converted into leverage, and leverage lets you multiply your time. I worked for Thomas Scott, the superintendent of the Pennsylvania Railroad. He was a hard man, demanding, ruthless when he needed to be. But he was also the first person who treated me like I had a brain worth developing. He started explaining things to me. Why the railroad routed trains the way it did. Why certain investments made sense. Why timing mattered in business. He wasn't being kind. He was testing me, seeing if I could think beyond the obvious, seeing if I could understand the game underneath the game. And I could. When he offered me a chance to invest in the Adams Express Company, I had a choice to make. I had no money. My family had nothing. But I understood what he was offering me. He was offering me a chance to stop trading time for money and start trading knowledge for leverage. My mother mortgaged our house, $500, everything we had, the house we'd worked years to buy, the only security we had in the world. People in our community thought we were insane. Why would a poor family bet everything on a stock investment? Why would we risk the roof over our heads? Because we understood something they didn't. The real risk wasn't investing. The real risk was staying poor. Let me tell you what poverty does to you over time. It makes you risk averse. It makes you conservative. Because when you have nothing, the thought of losing that nothing is terrifying. So you hold on, you save, you avoid risk, and you stay poor. Because wealth is built on calculated risk. Wealth is built on betting on yourself when no one else will. Wealth is built on understanding that the cost of staying where you are is higher than the cost of trying to leave. The investment in Adams Express returned dividends within months, then more, then more. That $500 became $1,000, then $2,000, then $5,000. And I learned something that changed my life. Money makes money faster than labor makes money. This is the invisible rule that separates classes. The poor work for their money. The rich make their money work for them. And the gap between those two approaches is the gap between poverty and wealth. But here's what most people miss. You can't skip steps. You can't go from poor to rich without going through the middle. And the middle is the hardest part because the middle is where you have to do both. You have to work for money and make money work for you. For years, I worked my job at the railroad during the day and managed my investments at night. I was working 16, 18-hour days, not because I loved work, but because I understood that the only way out of poverty was through discipline that looked like punishment. This is what people don't want to hear. There is no easy path from poor to rich. There is no shortcut. There is no hack. There is only the willingness to outwork, outstudy, and outlast everyone else who wants what you want. I invested in sleeping car companies because I knew businessmen would pay for comfort. I invested in iron because I knew railroads needed it. I invested in oil because I knew industry required it. I invested in bridge companies because I knew the future was iron, not stone. Every investment was based on the same principle: find where the world is going and get there first. But let me tell you the secret that made all of this possible. The secret that most poor people never learn because no one teaches it to them. The secret is this: poverty is not about lacking money. Poverty is about lacking information. When I was a telegraph operator, I had access to information that most people didn't have. I knew which companies were expanding, which ones were struggling, which industries were growing, which technologies were emerging. I didn't have more money than anyone else. I had more information, and information, when acted upon, becomes wealth. This is why education matters, not the degree, not the credential, but the actual knowledge, the understanding of how systems work, how money flows, how value is created and captured. My mother couldn't explain economics to me. She didn't know the words, but she knew that learning to read would give me access to information that could change my life. And she was right. By the time I was 30, I was making more from my investments than my salary, not because I was smarter than everyone else, but because I had positioned myself to see opportunities others couldn't see and had the courage to act on them when others wouldn't. But I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something. I was not special. I was not gifted. I was not lucky. I was a poor immigrant boy who worked in a factory basement. There was nothing about me that predicted success. What I had was the lesson, the one lesson every poor man must learn. Your circumstances are real, but they are not permanent. Let me say that again because it's the most important sentence in this entire story. Your circumstances are real, but they are not permanent. When you're poor, the world tells you every day that your position is fixed, that you are where you belong, that the system is designed this way and you should accept it. The factory owner, the landlord, the bank, the government, everyone who benefits from your poverty has an interest in convincing you that poverty is your natural state. It's not. Poverty is a condition, not an identity. It's a situation you're in, not a definition of who you are. But here's the hard truth. The world will not help you escape. The world is designed to keep you exactly where you are. The factory wants cheap labor. The landlord wants tenants. The bank wants debtors. The system needs people at the bottom. No one is coming to save you. You have to save yourself. And the only way to save yourself is to learn the things that the people above you don't want you to learn. Learn how money works, not just how to earn it. but how it flows, how it multiplies, how it concentrates, how the wealthy use it as a tool rather than a goal. Learn how value is created, not just hard work. Anyone can work hard, but how innovation creates value, how efficiency creates value, how owning the means of production creates value. Learn how systems work, how businesses operate, how markets function, how supply and demand actually work in practice, not just in theory. This is the education that matters, not what they teach you in school, but what the wealthy teach their children at the dinner table. When I sold Carnegie Steel to JP Morgan in 1901 for 480 million, people asked me how I did it, how a poor Scottish immigrant became the richest man in the world. And I told them the truth. I learned in the lesson my poverty taught me. I learned that the world doesn't owe me anything, that if I wanted something, I had to take it. That success is not about deserving, it's about becoming. I became a person who understood steel better than anyone else. I became a person who could see the future of American industry. I became a person who was willing to risk everything repeatedly because I understood that the biggest risk was not trying. But here's what I didn't tell them. Here's the part of the lesson that took me decades to understand. Wealth without purpose is just a bigger prison. I spent the first half of my life escaping poverty and building an empire. I worked like a machine. I sacrificed relationships. I crushed competitors. I broke strikes. I did things I'm not proud of because I believed that success justified the cost. And then I won. I had more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I had power. I had influence. I had everything I thought I wanted. And I was empty. Because I had learned how to escape poverty, but I hadn't learned what to do with wealth. This is the second part of the lesson. The part that most people only learn too late or never learn at all. The point of escaping poverty is not to become rich. It's to become free. Free to choose. Free to build. Free to contribute. Free to matter. But if all you do is accumulate, you're still trapped. You're just trapped in a bigger room. I spent the second half of my life giving away 90 of my fortune. I built libraries because I understood that education was the only way out of poverty. I funded universities because I believed that knowledge should be accessible to everyone. I created institutions that would outlast me because I understood that wealth is temporary, but legacy is permanent. People asked me why I gave it all away. They said I worked too hard to build it just to give it away, but they didn't understand. I didn't give it away. I invested it in people, in potential, in the same kind of boy I used to be, sitting in a basement wondering if there was any way out. This is a complete lesson, the one lesson every poor man must learn. Your circumstances are real but not permanent. You can escape them, but only by becoming someone different than who you are. And when you escape them, your responsibility is not to hoard what you've built, but to create paths for others to follow. Because the measure of your wealth is not what you accumulate, it's what you make possible. I made steel. But what I really built was opportunity. Every library with my name on it is a door. Every scholarship is a ladder. Every institution is a message to a poor kid somewhere. You are not trapped. Let me tell you what I wish someone had told me when I was 13 years old in that factory basement. You are poor today. That is a fact. But facts change. You have no money today. That is true. But money can be earned. You have no education today. That is real. But knowledge can be learned. You have no connection today. That is your situation. But relationships can be built. Everything you lack can be acquired if you're willing to do two things: learn what you don't know and become who you're not yet. This is the hardest thing to hear when you're poor, because when you're desperate, you want instant solutions. You want someone to hand you the answer. You want the shortcut. There is no shortcut, but there is a path, and the path starts with a decision. The decision to stop accepting your circumstances as permanent and start treating them as temporary. When I look back at my life, I don't see a straight line from poverty to wealth. I see 1,000 small decisions, 1,000 moments where I chose learning over comfort, 1,000 times I invested in tomorrow instead of spending on today. 1,000 hours studying what successful men knew that I didn't. And I see one big decision that made all the others possible. The decision to believe that I could become someone different than who I was, not through magic, not through luck, but through learning, through discipline, through positioning, through calculated risk, through relentless work. This is not a romantic story. This is not a fairy tale. I'm not telling you that if you believe in yourself, the universe will provide. I'm telling you that if you learn the rules of the game, if you position yourself strategically, if you develop skills, the market values, if you take calculated risks, if you work longer and harder than your competition, if you never stop learning, you can win. Not easily, not quickly, but you can win. And when you win, you have a choice. You can build a bigger prison for yourself, or you can open doors for others. I chose doors. Not because I'm a saint, not because I'm generous, but because I finally understood what wealth is for. Wealth is not for comfort. Wealth is for construction, for building things that matter, for creating opportunities that didn't exist, for making the impossible possible for people who can't yet imagine it. Every poor man must learn this lesson. But most don't learn it until it's too late. They escape poverty and spend their wealth on things that don't matter. Or they never escape at all because they never believe escape is possible. I'm telling you it's possible. I'm telling you that the room you're in right now, no matter how small, has a door. You might not see it yet. You might not know how to open it, but it's there. And the key to that door is knowledge. Not just information, but understanding. Understanding how the world actually works. Understanding what the wealthy know that the poor don't. Understanding that the game is rigged, but still playable. I played the game, I won the game, and then I tried to change the game for the people coming after me. Because the one lesson every poor man must learn is this: you are not your circumstances, you are your decisions. Decide to learn, decide to grow, decide to take risks, decide to become, decide to build, and decide that when you win, you'll open doors instead of building walls. That's the lesson. That's how I went from a factory basement to owning the world's largest steel company. That's how I went from poverty to wealth. That's how I went from powerless to powerful. Not because I was special, but because I learned the lesson that most poor people never learn. You are not trapped. You are just locked in a room where no one told you about the door. I'm telling you about the door. Now it's your choice whether to open it. The world needs people who escape poverty and remember where they came from, who build empires and then build libraries, who become rich and then make others rich, who learn the lesson and then teach the lesson. Be one of those people. Because the one lesson every poor man must learn is not just how to escape poverty, it's how to destroy it for others. That's what I spent my fortune doing. That's what every library, every scholarship, every institution I built was designed to do. Not to make people grateful to me, but to give them the same chance I got. The chance to learn, the chance to grow, the chance to become. Your poverty is real, but it's not permanent. Learn the lesson, become the person. Open the door, and when you're on the other side, when you've escaped, when you built something that matters, don't forget to open doors for others. That's the complete lesson. That's what I learned. That's what I'm teaching you. Now go, learn, build, become, and remember, the man who dies rich dies disgraced, but the man who builds wealth and uses it to destroy poverty for others, that man dies victorious. Be victorious.